Today on Nerd of the Rings, we are going to look at all of the known travels of Gandalf throughout his thousands of years in Middle-earth. Now there's a lot to cover, so buckle in and let's get started. Gandalf was originally known as Olorin, one of the Maiar. He lived in Aman, along with the Valar, throughout the First and Second Ages of Middle-earth. Due to Sauron's dark spirit of malice increasing over time, the Valar chose to send a select group of Maiar to assist the peoples of Middle-earth. When selected, Olorin does not wish to go, saying he fears Sauron. Manwë, Lord of the Valar, replies that it's all the more reason why he should go. In the year 1000 of the Third Age, Olorin departs Valinor and sails to the Grey Havens of Middle-earth. Olorin arrives shortly after two of the other Istari, or wizards, Curomo and Eowendil, otherwise known as Saruman and Radagast. At roughly this same time, Sauron, in the form of the Necromancer, appears in Mirkwood. At Mithrandir, Olorin is welcomed by his friend Glorfindel and Círdan the Shipwright. Círdan gives Olorin Narya, one of the elven rings of power, predicting that he would have future struggles with evil and that this ring would aid him in his labors. Unlike Saruman and the Blue Wizards, Olorin restricts his activities to the westlands of Middle-earth, where the Eldar and the remnants of the Dúnedain dwelt. The elves name him Mithrandir, which means the Grey Pilgrim. Among the dwarves, he is called Tharkûn, meaning Grey Man or Staff Man, while the men of Arnor call him Gandalf, his name that would be most commonly used. Around 1100 of the Third Age, the wizards and the Eldar discover that some evil entity resides in Dol Guldur in southern Mirkwood. Dark shapes move in the forest and evil begins to multiply in the woods. Some suspect that one of the Nazgûl has returned, or that some new evil is rising. Gandalf, being unsure of all these possibilities, fears that Sauron himself may have returned. Over the next 200 years, evil continues to grow. Orcs are multiplying in the Misty Mountains. The Witch King builds a fortress in the northern realm of Angmar and wages war on the kingdom of Arnor. Moria and Minas Ithil fall under a shadow, while other wars, plagues, and catastrophes occur across Middle-earth. Finally, in 2063, Gandalf travels alone to Dol Guldur to discover what secrets lie there. The Necromancer flees before him, preventing Gandalf from discovering his true identity. In acknowledgement of this rising evil, the White Council is formed 3 years later. Galadriel wishes Gandalf to be made leader of the council, but he declines the position, wishing to maintain his independence and avoid setting down roots in a particular location. Instead, Saruman takes the position. As Gandalf continues his wanderings in Eriador, he meets and befriends the hobbits in the Shire. During the long winter of 2758, a deadly 5-month-long ordeal, Gandalf comes to their aid. It was during this time of their trial that he comes to admire the pity and courage which the humble hobbits have in their hearts. In 2845, the dwarven king Thrain disappears on a journey en route to Erebor from the Blue Mountains. Gandalf sets out to look for the missing king. He enters the abandoned city of Khazad-dûm, and after searching in vain, he exits through the doors of Durin. Unfortunately, exiting the doors of Durin does not give one the knowledge of how to open them from the outside. In 2850, his search leads him once again to Dol Guldur. This time, he enters secretly. He finds Thrain in the dungeons and is given the king's last possessions, the map and key to Erebor. Gandalf learns that the Necromancer has taken the last of the 7 dwarven rings from Thrain, and Gandalf's fear is confirmed. The Necromancer is Sauron. Gandalf escapes Dol Guldur and returns to the White Council in Rivendell in 1851. He urges the council to attack Sauron while the One Ring is still lost and Sauron's power is lessened. Saruman, however, says it is better to watch and wait, claiming the ring had long ago rolled from the Anduin to the sea. The majority of the council agrees with Saruman. They did not yet realize that Saruman even now wanted the ring for himself and was secretly searching for it along the banks of the Anduin. Elrond confides in Gandalf that he had a foreboding that the ring would be found and the war to end the age was coming. He fears it will end in darkness and despair. Gandalf encourages the Elf Lord, saying that there are many strange chances and help oft shall come from the hands of the weak. Over the years, Gandalf occasionally visits the Shire. He comes often in later centuries to participate in the Midsummer's Eve parties, thrown by his friend, the Old Took. He impresses young hobbits with his stories and, of course, his fireworks. It was at this time that he meets a relatively adventurous young hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. Over time, Gandalf grows concerned about the weakened state of the North. With Smaug having seized Erebor and destroyed Dale in 2770, combined with Arnor having been decimated centuries earlier by the Witch King, the north of Middle-earth is incredibly vulnerable. He fears that Sauron will gain the allegiance of Smaug to terrible effect. If Sauron were also to gain control of the northern passes in the mountains and the lands of Angmar, he could assail all of Middle-earth from the north. It should also be noted that by this time, Mordor is well in control of the Ringwraiths, who had conquered Minas Ithil and turned the Gondorian fortifications meant to guard against Mordor into a means of shielding it, meaning the Free Peoples would potentially have mighty enemies to both the north and the south, in addition to the peoples loyal to Sauron in the east. In 2941, while staying the night at Bree, Gandalf happens across Thorin Oakenshield. Thorin initiates the conversation due to a strange urging to seek Gandalf. Gandalf is intrigued, for he had thought to seek Thorin as well. They find that they are taking the same route through the Shire, so they agree to travel together. Thorin wants advice, and he and Gandalf speak of Erebor and Smaug. Gandalf ends up accompanying Thorin through the Shire and to the dwarves' new home in the Blue Mountains. He devises a plan to help the dwarves destroy Smaug and reclaim Erebor, with a burglar of Gandalf's choosing. Gandalf returns to the Shire, following the lead of chance. He hears news of a hobbit who was known to be a bit odd, who was known to go off for days at a time by himself. He was often seen talking to strangers, even dwarves. With this news, Gandalf heads to Hobbiton to see how this hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, had changed over the past 20 years since he last saw him. But Bilbo isn't there, he's gone off again. This time in hopes of seeing elves during the Elves' New Year the following day. This was enough for Gandalf. He knows time is short and that he's due to meet the White Council again in August. He rides back to Thorin in the Blue Mountains, where he would attempt to convince Thorin to take a small company in secret and to take along Bilbo. On April 25th, Gandalf returns to Bag End, looking for someone to share in an adventure. Gandalf travels with the company of Thorin Oakenshield. He rescues the party from the 3 trolls in the Trollshaws, gains his sword Glamdring, and the group stops for a 2-week respite in Rivendell. Gandalf leads the company through the Misty Mountains. When they unknowingly camp in the front porch of Goblin Town, Gandalf is the only one who manages to evade capture. He shows up later, killing the Great Goblin and leading the dwarves to the exit. Bilbo would meet the company outside after his own adventure with Gollum. On their escape, the company is saved by the Eagles, who take them to their eyrie in the mountains. The next day, the Eagles take Gandalf and the company to the summit of the Carrack. Gandalf then leads the company to the home of Beorn. After leaving Beorn's hall, Gandalf leaves the company to meet with the rest of the White Council. He finally convinces Saruman and the rest of the council to attack Dol Guldur. Saruman agrees because Sauron had begun having his forces search the Anduin for the ring. If the council could expel Sauron, it would enable him to resume his own search for the ring without competition. Gandalf joins the council in assailing Dol Guldur. They drive out the necromancer, who flees to Mordor. Gandalf receives word regarding Thorin's company. He learns they lost their path in Mirkwood and were captured by, then escaped from, the Wood Elves. He is eager to return to the company and sets out as soon as possible. By the time he finally arrives in the area, Smaug is dead, and the dwarves of Erebor and the Iron Hills are preparing for an attack by the Lakemen and the Elves of Mirkwood. He is with Bard and Thranduil when Bilbo brings them the Arkenstone. On October 10th, as hostilities begin among the armies, Gandalf halts them, warning of the impending invasion by the Orcs and Wargs. The dwarves, elves, and men form an alliance, defeat the Orcs and Wargs, leaving the control of Erebor firmly in dwarven hands. After the adventure, Gandalf accompanies Bilbo as they retrace much of their route home. They celebrate Yule at Beorn's. Then they return to Rivendell, where he discusses with Elrond the events of Dol Guldur and the Lonely Mountain. Gandalf had accomplished his goal of slaying Smaug, while also destroying a large number of orcs and wargs in the north, removing threats to both Rivendell and Lothlorien. Gandalf and Bilbo recover some of the buried gold from the troll horde as they pass through the Trollshaws and make their way to the borders of the Shire. Years later, in 2949, Gandalf returns to Bag End with Balin. They visit and discuss the news of Erebor and Dale. In 2951, 10 years after his expulsion from Dol Guldur, Sauron openly declares himself in Mordor and rebuilds Barad-dûr. In 2953, the White Council meets for the last time to debate about the Rings of Power. Saruman once again manages to quiet the fears of his peers, claiming to have knowledge that the One Ring was lost in the Great Sea. Saruman, out of jealousy and fear, sets spies to watch all of Gandalf's movements. This leads to his discovery of the Shire and Gandalf's interest in it. Saruman begins sending agents to Bree and the South Farthing. In 2956, Gandalf meets Aragorn, the secret heir of Isildur. They quickly become friends and from then on work together toward a common goal, the defeat of Sauron. Gandalf also visits Minas Tirith, where he is welcomed by Faramir. He teaches Faramir from his wisdom, which displeases Denethor, who doesn't trust the wizard. During this period, Gandalf also frequently visits the Shire. He notes Bilbo's unusual youthfulness and the Hobbit's suspicious magic ring begins to weigh on his mind. He recalls how Bilbo originally lied about how he came to own the ring, and noticed how preoccupied Bilbo had become with it. This un-Hobbit-like behavior rouses his suspicions. In 3001, he organizes Bilbo's farewell party and convinces Bilbo to leave the ring for Frodo. He warns Frodo not to use it, for he has begun to suspect that this is in fact a ring of power. He is now eager to find out more about Bilbo's ring and leaves the Shire right away. Gandalf, with the help of Aragorn, begins to search for Gollum. At Gandalf's request, the Dúnedain double their watch on the Shire. 3 years later, in 3004, he returns to check on Frodo in the Shire. He would periodically return to do so over the next 4 years. In 3009, Gandalf and Aragorn renew their hunt for Gollum, and would continue searching for the next 8 years. They searched the Vales of Anduin, Mirkwood, Rhovanion, even down to the Mountains of Shadow and the fences of Mordor. They heard rumors of Gollum but did not find him. In 3017, Gandalf makes his way back to Minas Tirith, where he finds the scroll of Isildur and pieces together the missing history of the One Ring. On his way back to the Shire, he gets word from the Galadrim that Aragorn has finally captured Gollum. He turns to Mirkwood and interrogates Gollum to confirm what he already knew about the ring. A great fear comes over Gandalf when he learns that Sauron had captured Gollum and learned not only of the ring, but also the names of Shire and Baggins. He returns in haste to the Shire, certain that Frodo's ring is not just a ring of power, but the One Ring. Gandalf reaches the Shire and advises Frodo to leave as soon as possible. He leaves, promising Frodo he will return before Bilbo and Frodo's birthday of September 22nd, and will escort him to Rivendell. He wanders around Eriador, hearing news from Gondorian refugees, who had a fear they could not speak about. He finally meets Radagast the Brown, who brings a message from Saruman. The message warns that the Ringwraiths are looking for the Shire, and that Saruman must see him at once. Gandalf goes to the Prancing Pony in Bree near mid-year and writes a letter to Frodo, urging him to leave for Rivendell as soon as possible and to seek a man named Strider, whose true name is Aragorn, along with a riddle to identify him. He tasks Barlam and Butterbur with sending the letter to Hobbiton before leaving Bree. Butterbur would, of course, forget to send the letter. On July 10, 3018, Gandalf arrives at Isengard. Saruman's treachery is revealed and Gandalf is imprisoned on the pinnacle of Orthanc for over 2 months. Finally, on September 18th, Gwaihir helps Gandalf escape and takes him to Edoras. There, Theoden would not listen to Gandalf's warnings and tells him to take a horse and be gone. Gandalf takes the best horse in the land, Shadowfax, and heads north on September 23rd. The next day, he crosses the Isen. He continues north, crossing the Grey Flood on September 27th, reaching Sarn Ford on the 28th, and continues to the Shire. The following day, he reaches the Shire as the hobbits are on the Barrow Downs. He talks with Gaffer Gamgee and learns that the Black Riders have been searching the Shire. Gandalf sets out for Bree, where he learns from Barlaman that the hobbits had already left with Strider. Gandalf stays the night and leaves for Weathertop. Being a high point in the region, he hopes to observe the surrounding area. There, on the night of October 3rd, he's assailed by the Nazgul. At sunrise on October 4th, he escapes and flees north, 4 of the riders in pursuit.
There are 5 wraiths behind you. Where the other 4 are, I do not know.
He travels up the Horwell and through the Enten Moors. Being unable to ride among the rocks of the Trollfells, Shadowfax departs, returning to his land in the south. At last, on October 18th, Gandalf arrives in Rivendell from the north. 3 days later, Frodo, bearing the ring, comes to Rivendell. Gandalf would remain in Rivendell for some time, as the Council of Elrond is held. The Fellowship of the Ring is formed on December 18th. 1 week later, on December 25th, the Fellowship departs Rivendell. They travel south until they reach Hollin. They attempt to cross over Caradhras via the Red Horn Gate, the very pass where Elrond's wife Celebrian was captured by orcs centuries earlier. The Fellowship is turned back by a blizzard and impassable snow. They resolve to attempt passing under the mountain and head south to Moria. On January 13th, they are attacked by wolves and reach the West Gate. Gandalf leads the company through Moria, and they spend the following night in the 21st Hall. On the 15th, they find the chamber of Mazarbul. They are attacked by orcs and the Balrog. They head for the eastern exit and arrive at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, where Gandalf makes his stand against the Balrog. Both fall into the abyss of unnamed depth. For 8 days, Gandalf battles the Balrog in the Battle of the Uttermost Foundations of Stone. On January 23rd, Gandalf pursues the Balrog to the Endless Stair. They climb to the highest peak at the pinnacle of the Silvertine of the Misty Mountains. There, at the Battle of the Peak, Gandalf slays the Balrog. "I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place, and broke the mountainside where he smote in his ruin. Then darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time, and I wandered far on roads that I will not tell." Gandalf the Grey dies on January 25th, 3019. After roughly 3 weeks, Gandalf returns to life and lies in a trance on February 15th. 2 days later, Gwaihir finds Gandalf and takes him to Lorien, noting that Gandalf feels as light as a swan feather. In Lothlorien, Gandalf is clothed, replenished, and given a new staff by Galadriel. He learns that Frodo and Sam have split from the Fellowship and are attempting the quest on their own. As Frodo is now beyond his assistance, he travels south to Fangorn Forest. On March 1st, Gandalf meets Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, revealing his resurrection and new title of Gandalf the White. He calls Shadowfax and rides with the 3 hunters to Edoras, where he exposes Grima Wormtongue as a traitor and encourages Theoden to ride west to battle Saruman. Gandalf is now fully aware that the Great War is imminent and realizes that if Saruman conquers Rohan, Gondor will be alone with enemies on all sides. As Theoden heads west to Helm's Deep, Gandalf searches for Erkenbrand and the forces of the West Fold. Gandalf finds Erkenbrand with his 1,000 soldiers and leads them to Helm's Deep. They arrive at dawn on March 4th, turning the tide of the Battle of the Hornburg. Gandalf then rides with Theoden to Isengard, where they parley with Saruman. After Saruman refuses Gandalf's offer of forgiveness, Gandalf breaks his staff, expels him from their order and the White Council. He also gains possession of the Palantir of Orthanc, thrown from the tower by Grima Wormtongue. That night, the company makes camp near the slope of Dol Baran, where Pippin looks into the Palantir. A Nazgul flies overhead, and Gandalf tells the group not to wait for the dawn. They must ride out immediately to Helm's Deep. Gandalf leaps upon Shadowfax and takes Pippin as he sets off to Minas Tirith. 3 days later, as they are passing through Anorion in Gondor, they see the beacons of Gondor alight atop the White Mountains. They also see the errand riders of Gondor heading for Rohan, those who bore the Red Arrow. The following day, March 9th, Gandalf and Pippin arrive in Minas Tirith. The next day, Faramir is returning from Osgiliath and is attacked by the Nazgul. Gandalf rides out to the field of Pelennor and drives them away by revealing the power within him. He learns from Faramir that Frodo and Sam are still alive and are headed toward Mordor. 4 days later, on March 14th, Sauron's forces begin the siege of Minas Tirith. Gandalf leads Gondor's forces in defense of the city. Early in the morning on the 15th, the Witch King breaches the gate of Minas Tirith. Gandalf confronts his enemy at the gate before the horns of Rohan draw away the Lord of the Nazgul. The siege is broken by the Rohirrim. Aragorn arrives with men from the southern fiefs. The Witch King is killed by Éowyn, and Sauron's forces are utterly defeated. Aragorn, Imrahil, and Éomer, the remaining Lords of the West, select Gandalf as their leader in the upcoming final battles. All his efforts over the centuries would culminate in the following days of events. He advises the Lords to go north to the Morannon in order to draw Sauron's eye and forces away from Frodo's likely location. On March 18th, they set out from Minas Tirith, reaching the Morgul Vale on the 19th. By the 21st, they are well into Ithilien and evade an ambush by a small group of Sauron's forces. The Nazgul begin to spy on the host from a distance. On the 24th, the group camps in the desolation of the Morannon, and on the 25th of March, they arrive outside the Black Gate of Mordor. There, Gandalf parleys with the mouth of Sauron, after which, the host is surrounded on the Slag Hills, and the Battle of Morannon ensues. After the ring is destroyed and the day is won, Gandalf accompanies Gwaihir once again as he and his eagle brethren pass over Udun and Gorgoroth and come to Mount Doom, where they rescue Frodo and Sam. They return the pair to the field of Cormallen, where Aragorn heals them. They would not wake up until April 8th, still camped at Cormallen. Finally, Gandalf and the rest of the reunited Fellowship make their way back to Minas Tirith, where on May 1st, 3019, Gandalf would place the crown upon Aragorn's head, coronating him as king of the reunited kingdom of Arnor and Gondor. On June 25th, he takes Aragorn up to the high hollow of Mindolluin, the easternmost peak of the Ered Nimres. There, Aragorn discovers a sapling of the line of Nimloth to replace the deceased White Tree of Gondor. Shortly afterward, Aragorn and Arwen are married. On July 22nd, Gandalf and the other Fellowship members depart Minas Tirith as part of the funeral escort of King Theoden. They arrive in Edoras just over 2 weeks later on August 7th. On the 10th, Theoden is laid to rest. 3 days later, the Fellowship and the people of Rivendell and Lorien take their leave of King Éomer and head north. On August 18th, they come to Helm's Deep, where they stay for 2 days before departing for Isengard. On August 22nd, they come to Isengard, where they discover Treebeard has let Saruman and Grima Wormtongue leave Orthanc. From there, Gandalf and the hobbits part ways with King Elessar, and continue north with Elrond, Celeborn, and Galadriel. They overtake Saruman, who was traveling on foot, and continue through northern Dunland. They pass within sight of the Mountain of Moria on September 6th, near the gate they had passed through months earlier. A week later, Celeborn and Galadriel split from the group as Gandalf and the rest make their way toward Rivendell. They pass the moors leading to the Valley of Rivendell and arrive in Rivendell on September 21st. Gandalf and the hobbits rest in Rivendell, where they reunite with Bilbo, until October 5th when they set out for the Shire. On October 6th, they cross the ford of Bruinen, passing Weathertop, and finally come to Bree on October 28th. They leave Bree 2 days later. Gandalf parts with the hobbits on the borders of the Shire, leaving them to deal with Saruman and his men. Gandalf travels to the home of Tom Bombadil. For the next 2 years, we don't know for certain what Gandalf did, although it's possible that his long talk with Tom Bombadil in fact lasted the full 2 years. Finally, nearly 2 years later on September 29th, Gandalf meets Frodo at the Grey Havens. He says farewell to Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and joins Elrond, Galadriel, Shadowfax, and his friends Bilbo and Frodo Baggins aboard the vessel. He sails into the west, his many travels far and wide having not been in vain, but helping to secure the final victory of the free peoples of Middle-earth in defeating Sauron. The sole member of the Astari to remain true to his mission, Gandalf takes his final journey, sailing to Aman and becoming Olorin once more. Thanks so much for watching this video on one of Middle-earth's greatest characters, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's special spooky Halloween edition of Nerd of the Rings. As always, a huge thank you to my Patreon patrons who help make this channel happen. And a special thanks to my wizard level supporter Tom DeBombadil 19. To find out how you can also be recognized at the end of each video, go to my Patreon page. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.